On a fateful night in a quiet corner of New York City, heart-wrenching screams pierced the darkness. The victims, innocent children, fell one by one to brutal knife attacks. They were too young to understand why they had to suffer such a cruel fate, and even more incomprehensible was why the perpetrator was someone they lovingly called Uncle Mindong. This tragedy begins with the story of Zhuo Yilin, a man born and raised in Liankun Village, Changlei District, Fuzhou City, Fujian Province, China. Fate had not been kind to him from an early age. His father died in a workplace accident when he was just 12, leaving his mother, Chen Yizhai, to raise him alone. In the 1980s, when China implemented its reform and opening up policy, a wave of people from coastal provinces like Guangdong and Fujian sought opportunities abroad. Many succeeded, finding good jobs and sending money home to help their families escape poverty. Witnessing the transformation of families with relatives working abroad, the residents of Liankun Village began their own exodus. They believed it was the quickest path out of poverty. However, lacking legal documentation, many chose the risky and dangerous path of illegal immigration. Even while still in school, Yilin had decided to follow this path. At age 21, with $40,000 borrowed from relatives and friends, Yilin pursued his American dream like many other young men from his village. After an arduous journey filled with challenges, he finally reached the bustling streets of New York City. Though the city was foreign to him, it held the promise of opportunities and hope for a brighter future. By this time, Chinese cuisine in America had developed extensively, offering diverse options from Guangdong, Sichuan, braised dishes, and specialties from Dongbei and Xinjiang. Chinese restaurants had spread beyond major cities to small towns, train stations, bus terminals, and tourist destinations. Like many immigrants, language barriers and lack of professional skills limited Yilin to demanding manual labor jobs with modest wages. After searching, he found work at a Chinese restaurant, starting with the most basic tasks. His life mirrored that of his fellow immigrants, cramped in tiny rooms, sleeping in bunk beds with barely enough headroom. After painfully hitting his head numerous times when sitting up, he learned to adapt, never sitting fully upright. Life gradually improved over time. Steady income allowed him to upgrade to an upper bunk, and eventually his own bed. Finally, he could sit up straight without fear of hitting his head. After paying off his debts, like many immigrants, he set his sights on a higher goal: obtaining a green card. In the eyes of many, only with this document in hand could they truly consider themselves successful in America. After more than 15 years of hard work, Yilin finally achieved this milestone. He had become someone with status in the eyes of others. However, approaching 30 and still single, his mother back home couldn't help but worry about his happiness. She actively searched for a suitable match for her son. Through matchmaking, he met and fell in love with Li Qiaojun, a beautiful girl from his home province of Fujian. With the help of human traffickers, Qiaojun soon made her way to New York to reunite with her love. They quickly married, and not long after, Qiaojun was fortunate enough to receive her green card, officially beginning her new life in America. After marriage, Yilin and Qiaojun moved to Brooklyn, New York. They rented an apartment at 870 57th Street, 8th Avenue, Sunset Park. Their apartment was on the first floor, with 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. Though not spacious, it was in a convenient location. To save money, Yilin lived an extremely frugal and simple life. He not only didn't smoke, but also refused to spend money on entertainment. Despite being invited many times by the restaurant owner, after 12 hours of exhausting work, he only wanted to return to his dormitory, relaxing by watching TV or talking on the phone with his wife and children. With a modest salary of $3,000 per month, he had to be strict with his spending, never indulging in any luxuries for himself. However, despite living so frugally, Yilin was always generous with friends and family. He didn't hesitate to help a fellow villager pay off the enormous debt they had incurred to immigrate to America. During holidays and festivals, he regularly sent money home to support his aging mother. In this hard-working man's heart, he always cherished a dream. One day he would save enough money to move his family to the suburbs and own his own restaurant. This dream motivated him to work tirelessly. By 2013, Yilin's small family had grown to include 4 children: Linda, age 9, Amy, age 7, Kevin, age 5, and William, just 13 months old. To care for the youngest child, Xiaojun had quit her job to become a full-time homemaker. The 3 older children attended the elementary school near their home. However, a horrific tragedy on October 26, 2013, would suddenly destroy Yilin and Xiaojun's happy family. Around 10:45 p.m. on Saturday, October 26, 2013, the New York City Police Department received an emergency call. A woman's trembling, panicked voice reported that something had happened at her cousin's house. The perpetrator had been subdued by her husband, and police should come immediately. Coincidentally, 2 detectives from the NYPD's 66th Precinct were nearby handling a robbery case. They immediately drove to the scene upon receiving the report. Upon arrival, they saw a man in a gray tank top, barefoot and covered in blood, being restrained by another man. Next to the man in the tank top were a pair of scissors and a bloody cleaver. The woman who had called the police identified herself as Ting Ting. She informed them that her sister-in-law and 4 nieces and nephews were inside the house, all seriously injured, and the perpetrator was the restrained man. After handcuffing the suspect, the 2 detectives entered the house. They were shocked by the horrific scene before them. The floor was covered in blood. In the kitchen, Xiaojun, 37, and her son Kevin, 5, lay in pools of blood. They had multiple wounds on their bodies, particularly on their torsos, and their throats were nearly severed. Miraculously, both mother and son were still breathing. When paramedics brought the mother and son out, Kevin was unconscious, and Xiaojun couldn't speak. She tried to use her fingers to make the number 4, asking about her 4 children, but because many of her fingers had been cut during the struggle with the attacker, she could only raise 2 fingers on each hand. Before learning the fate of her children, Xiaojun lost consciousness and was rushed to the ambulance. Paramedics also worked urgently to stop Kevin's bleeding and performed CPR, but by the time they reached the hospital, the 5-year-old boy had passed away. Not long after, Xiaojun also died at the hospital. At the scene, the tragedy wasn't over. When the 2 detectives entered the bedroom, a heartbreaking sight awaited them. Linda and Amy lay motionless, showing no signs of life. Even little William, just 13 months old, hadn't escaped the killer's cruel hands. The deep wounds in the necks of all 3 children were testament to the brutality and inhumanity of the perpetrator, who hadn't hesitated to attack children who could barely speak. The devastating news left Yilin stunned. In just one night, he had lost everything. His wife and 4 young children had all been taken from him unjustly. The pain was almost too much to bear. But the truth became even more painful when he learned that the perpetrator Ting Ting's husband had caught wasn't a stranger, but Yilin's own cousin, Chen Mindong. Chen Mindong was born in 1988 in Changle, Fujian Province, China. His father, Chen Yitang, was the younger brother of Yilin's mother. The relationship between the 2 families was so close that they had pooled their money to build a 4-story house in the village where they lived together. Mindong was the eldest son in the family, with a younger brother named Chen Mingheng who was 5 years younger. The family had also adopted a daughter named Chen Nana. According to Mindong's mother, at that time, villagers had a common belief about the path to success. They thought that going abroad to work was better than pursuing education, as schooling took much time and didn't guarantee high earnings. Among the 7 sons in Mindong's extended family, 4 had already settled in America. This reinforced the belief that rather than spending time studying, it was better to go to America to make money and then return home to marry. Influenced by this mindset, Mindong abandoned his education after completing 7th grade and drifted aimlessly. When he was 16, his family had to borrow from everywhere to gather $70,000 to pay smugglers to take Mindong illegally into America. Yet even on the day of departure, Mindong showed his irresponsibility. He was so absorbed in playing video games at an internet cafe that he forgot about his departure time. His father had to personally go to the cafe, drag his son out, and hand him over to the traffickers. Afterward, Mindong traveled with the smugglers from Shenzhen to Hong Kong, then to Taiwan, and finally to Hawaii. The smugglers instructed Mindong to tear up his passport before landing. In Hawaii, they taught him that without a passport at immigration, he would be detained in a holding facility for investigation. At that point, as long as his relatives in America prepared enough money, they could bail him out. Everything went according to plan. Mindong was detained by U.S. authorities at a juvenile immigrant detention center in Arizona. Upon arrival, he was extremely surprised because the detention center wasn't what he had imagined, but looked more like a boarding school. There, he learned English and received free room and board. Most of the detainees were young men his age who had also immigrated illegally. After being bailed out by relatives in America, Mindong continued to borrow more money to hire a lawyer to apply for a green card, claiming political asylum. This was a common reason used by many illegal immigrants to America. While waiting for his green card, Mindong found work to earn money. His job was working in the kitchen, preparing fried foods at a Chinese restaurant in New York. This was his first job, and working in the kitchen was quite demanding, mainly frying dishes like chicken, pork, beef, spring rolls, and vegetables. In summer, standing in front of hot oil made him sweat profusely, with oil splattering on his body, often making him dizzy from the heat. But the pay was low. Mindong worked hard for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, but only received $300 per week in wages. After a year of grueling kitchen work, Mindong decided to seek work further away to earn money. He found restaurants in the suburbs that provided room and board and had few opportunities to spend money. These were ideal places to save money. For the next 8 years, Mindong worked at more than 10 takeout restaurants, mainly in suburban Chicago. Every week, he would take a bus from New York to the restaurants with his clothes and personal belongings. Work began at 9 a.m. and ended at 10 p.m. During his shift, he had 1 hour for meals and rest. After work, he would return to the staff quarters and go online to chat and update his social media status. After several years of saving, Mindong paid off his debt to the smugglers. Every Chinese New Year, he would send $2,000 to $4,000 to his family. On other holidays like the Mid-Autumn Festival and Dragon Boat Festival, he would send a few $100s. This was said to be a custom among Fujian people working away from home. Thanks to the money his son sent home along with their savings, Mr. Chen Yitang planned to build a 3-story house in the village. When Mrs. Chen Yijai, his sister and Zhuo Yilin's mother, learned of this, she discussed it with her brother and decided to contribute money to expand it to a 4-story house. After construction, both families moved in together. While family life back home grew increasingly warm and harmonious, Mindong's life in America faced many difficulties. Because of his quiet nature and lack of social skills, he frequently argued and even fought with colleagues. He often updated his status on social media. Through these status updates, we can glimpse Mindong's state of mind. He wrote things like, "Men bleed but don't cry. If you lose a fight, don't tell your family. Don't harm those who don't harm you." It was clear that Mindong was poor at communication and preferred using violence to solve problems. As a result, his work was unstable. No one wanted to work with him. Sometimes he would work at a restaurant for a few months, sometimes just a few days before quitting. Whenever he was unemployed, he would sink into depression. He would smoke and gamble away his savings. At first, he would occasionally invite friends to play games and chat, but he became increasingly withdrawn, quiet, and preferred to be alone. After changing many jobs in late 2012, a discouraged Mindong went to Jacksonville, Florida, to seek help from his uncle who owned a restaurant there. In his uncle's eyes, Mindong was a quiet, hard-working young man. He diligently sent money home to his parents and shared fruit with his kitchen colleagues. His uncle thought Mindong was just a kind young man trying to earn money and saw nothing unusual about him. However, after working for his uncle for half a year, an unexpected event changed the course of Mindong's life. On June 17, 2013, while working in the kitchen, Mindong received a call from his lawyer. The lawyer asked why he hadn't appeared in court that day. Mindong was bewildered, saying he didn't know he had to be in court. The lawyer informed him that due to his unexplained absence, the judge in Chicago considered this contempt of court and had rejected his political asylum application. The court ordered Mindong's deportation. From that day on, Mindong again became an illegal immigrant. He could no longer work legally or stay in America legally. Upon hearing this thunderbolt of news, he immediately flew back to Chicago to meet with his lawyer, but it was too late. The lawyer informed him that the judge's decision had been issued, and he was now illegally staying in America. But Mindong still had one last chance, his adopted sister Nana. When Nana learned of the situation, she called her brother and proposed they enter into a fake marriage. Nana wasn't Mindong's biological sister. She had been adopted by his family when very young. Nana's biological father had also illegally immigrated to America long ago. After getting his green card, he had become a U.S. citizen and sponsored his wife and 3 children, including Nana. At this time, Nana was working and only needed to pass her test to become a U.S. citizen. Then she could help her brother get a green card through a fake marriage. The problem was that Mindong didn't want a fake marriage. He told Nana he wanted a real marriage. He wanted to get a green card, become a U.S. citizen, and also wanted to marry Nana. But Nana immediately refused. She was only 18 and had always seen Mindong as a real brother. A fake marriage was possible, but a real marriage was out of the question. Learning that he still couldn't get a green card despite enduring 9 long, hard years in America, Mindong completely broke down. He became depressed and spent his days smoking and gambling. When his money ran out, with no other options, he returned to Florida to work illegally in his uncle's restaurant. But this time, his uncle noticed Mindong had completely changed. He was no longer the kind, hard-working young man he used to be. From June to September 2013, while working at his uncle's restaurant, Mindong often appeared dazed and distracted. He worked unfocused and frequently disappeared without reason. Once, while smoking in the dormitory, Mindong caused a fire, though fortunately it was extinguished in time. Though he was his nephew, his uncle could no longer accept Mindong's attitude and behavior. He fired him and advised him to seek psychological help. When he arrived in New York, Mindong also looked for work, but couldn't find any suitable jobs. He spent most of his time using drugs and gambling with friends. Every time he lost at gambling, he would violently smash the gambling machines. Mindong called his mother up to 4 times a day. He asked about the house construction and whether the family needed money. Once he told his mother that a fellow villager had called the night before, asking him when he would go to court, when he would get his green card, and when he would get married. When Mindong recounted his situation, this friend had mocked him, saying, "You're so useless. You've been in America for so many years and have nothing to show for it." The humiliation made this grown man break down crying while talking to his mother. He kept repeating this story, sometimes speaking nonsensically. What worried his mother most was that her son often couldn't sleep and would hear voices speaking to him but couldn't make out what they were saying. She feared her son's mental state was deteriorating. Concerned for her son, his mother called Nana, asking her to visit her brother in New York and take him to see a doctor. What seemed like helpful intervention would later become something Mindong's mother would deeply regret. At this time, Mindong was staying at Yilin and Xiaozhen's home. Xiaozhen's niece later recalled, "Previously, my aunt didn't have a habit of cooking breakfast. My 4 siblings usually had milk and bread or steamed buns for breakfast, but after Uncle Mindong came to stay, she started cooking breakfast and sometimes even made afternoon snacks for me. Uncle Mindong would also buy candies and snacks for the children. When Aunt went shopping, he would help watch the kids. Generally, the relationship between Uncle Mindong and my aunt's family was quite good at first. Everything began to change on October 23rd, when Nana came to visit her brother. At that time, Xiaozhen was out shopping, and 5-year-old Kevin opened the door to find Uncle Mindong and Nana in an intimate position. The innocent child said, "Uncle Mindong and Nana are getting married." But the child's innocent remark touched on the tension between Nana and Mindong. Angry, she struck Kevin, making him cry. She then pushed Kevin out of the room. The 5-year-old child stood crying outside the door. Shortly after, when Xiaozhen returned from shopping and heard her son's story, she became furious. She opened the door to find Kevin had vomited on the floor and no one had cleaned it up, making her even angrier. She called her son inside, but Kevin trembled, saying Nana wouldn't let him in. Hearing this, Xiaozhen said loudly, This is our house. Why do we need her permission to enter? She pulled her son inside and turned to Mindong and Nana, saying, You two adults couldn't even properly watch 3 children, and you couldn't even clean up when you saw the mess. The conflict immediately erupted, with Xiaojun and Mindong and Nana exchanging heated words. Before leaving, Nana made a cutting remark to her brother. If this family treats you like this, how can you have the face to stay here anymore? Then she left. Xiaozhen later told her husband Yilin about the incident. After hearing it, Yilin didn't want to make a big deal of it, fearing it would affect family relationships, so he tried to calm things down. He took Mindong to a nearby mahjong parlor and said, Stay here for a few days temporarily. But Mindong refused, saying the mahjong parlor was too noisy and he couldn't sleep there. Finally, he went to stay with a paternal uncle in New York. However, after staying there for just 1 day, on October 24th, Mindong returned to Yilin's home. He told Xiaozhen that he wasn't comfortable staying at his uncle's house and preferred staying there. On the evening of October 26th, Yilin wasn't home because he had to work at the restaurant. At this time, little Kevin was playing in the living room, while the other 3 children were sound asleep. After finishing the housework, Xiaozhen tried calling her husband, but perhaps because he was busy at the restaurant, Yilin didn't answer. She then turned to talk on the phone with her mother-in-law, Mrs. Yizhai, back in their hometown. During the conversation, Mrs. Yizhai reminded her daughter-in-law, Your house is small and you have 4 young children. Having Mindong stay there is really inconvenient. Moreover, Mindong seems mentally unstable lately. I'm worried he might do something to the children. She advised her daughter-in-law not to let Mindong stay anymore and to ask him to move elsewhere soon. Xiaozhen agreed with her mother-in-law's opinion. She told her mother about how Nana had hurt Kevin, but she also added, Mindong is pitiful too, mother. Having to make a living alone far from home, with no parents by his side. Well, he's family after all. We should help if we can. But while Xiaozhen was trying to speak kindly of Mindong, she looked into the kitchen and saw a terrifying sight. Mindong holding a knife, and beside him was little Kevin crying loudly. It was around 10:40 p.m. when she hurriedly ended the phone call with her mother-in-law, saying, Mother, he's holding a knife! She immediately rushed to the kitchen, but what could a woman and 4 children do in such a situation? The tragedy unfolded as we learned at the beginning. After the call with her daughter-in-law was cut off, Mrs. Yizhai had a terrible feeling and frantically called Ting Ting, Yilin's cousin who was also in New York. At this time, Mindong was changing clothes in the house, wearing new jeans and a tank top that Nana had bought him a few days before. That's why when he was arrested, his clothes were clean, only his bare feet were covered in blood. When they received the call, Ting Ting and her husband quickly went to Yilin's house and were the first to arrive at the scene. When they got there, the house was eerily quiet. Ting Ting's husband knocked on the door several times, but it took a while before Mindong opened it. Perhaps he was preparing to flee at this point, so he wasn't carrying any weapons. Ting Ting's husband immediately tackled and subdued him, while Ting Ting quickly called the police. After being arrested, the police arranged for a Chinese-speaking officer to interpret for Mindong. However, during the interrogation, an unexpected situation occurred. Although one hand was handcuffed to the table, he suddenly stood up, kicking the table toward the interpreter. Not stopping there, he used his free hand to attack the detective standing beside him. This rash action was immediately subdued by 2 officers, and as a result, Mindong faced additional charges beyond his initial crimes. When he calmed down, Mindong recounted the entire incident in Chinese. He said that he was coming out of the bedroom when he heard his sister-in-law complaining. He couldn't control himself and went to the kitchen to get the knife they used for cooking, then attacked everyone in the house, starting with Xiaozhen, Kevin, then Ami, Linda, and William. He claimed he didn't hear the children's screams. During the interrogation, Mindong expressed resentment toward the children, complaining that they often ordered him to do housework, but he said he had no conflict with his sister-in-law. Finally, he wrote a confession in messy handwriting, which included, Since coming to America, I've worked for many restaurants, many things have happened. I've gotten into fights in restaurants. Lately I've been in New York, always going back and forth in Yilin's house. All my friends are married, while I have to wander around in Flushing and Brooklyn's Chinatown. I've been thinking too much and can't sleep, Today I used a knife to kill my sister-in-law and the children. Perhaps due to his low education level, combined with mental health issues, Mindong's confession was very disjointed and grammatically incorrect, making it difficult for police to fully understand his intended meaning. After the case was made public outrage was directed not only at the perpetrator, but also at another person, Nana. Many blamed her for igniting the conflict between Mindong and Yilin's family that erupted into tragedy. Under intense public pressure, Nana suffered serious consequences, including losing her job and living in fear, afraid to leave her house for fear of being attacked. Although wanting to cooperate with police in the investigation, her fear of being attacked prevented her from coming to New York. However, Nana insisted she wasn't avoiding responsibility. Her phone was always ready to receive calls from police and lawyers. Nana explained that on that day, while helping her brother try on new clothes, Kevin had accidentally seen them and teased that they were going to get married. She felt embarrassed and couldn't control herself, so she slapped Kevin. A few days later, the 3 children had eaten all of her calcium supplements and worried about their health effects. She made them drink lots of water. Kevin was punished by having to stand outside. That was why he had vomited. Nana admitted she was wrong in both incidents, but Xiaojun had been forgiving, never scolding her or her brother, though her attitude had become somewhat cold. Nana felt guilty and didn't want to stay anymore, so on October 19th, a week before the murders, she left New York and returned to work at the restaurant. Nana's testimony and that of the victim's niece differed in many points, both in timing and sequence of events. Nana denied having an intimate relationship with her brother, saying she was just helping him change clothes. She also claimed that slapping Kevin and his vomiting were 2 separate incidents that happened at different times. 2 weeks after the murders, at 1:45 p.m. on November 10, 2013, the funeral for Xiaojun and her 4 children was held at Forest Hill Cemetery in New Jersey. Because William was only 1 year old, the family couldn't bear to let him lie alone, so they decided to place him in his mother's arms in the same grave. At the funeral, Zhuo Yilin, Mrs. Chen Yizhai, and other family members were overcome with grief, their heartbreaking cries echoing throughout the cemetery. Many funeral attendees couldn't hold back their tears. A month after his wife and children were buried, in December 2013, Yilin bought a plane ticket and decided to leave this land of tragic memories. Upon returning to his hometown, Zhuo Yilin couldn't adjust to life there. His mental state deteriorated. Whenever he saw other families' children, he would remember his own 4 beloved children. The pain was so great that he wanted to join his wife and children. As we know, Mrs. Chen Yizhai, Zhuo Yilin's mother, and Mr. Chen Yitang, Mindong's father, were siblings. They had built a 4-story house together to live in. Though the 2 families lived on separate floors, they saw each other daily. One side was the victim's family, the other the perpetrator's family. It was an incredibly awkward situation. The atmosphere in the house quickly became tense and heavy. Though Mindong had committed his crime in America and was imprisoned there, his relatives at home were also affected. Xiaojun's relatives had repeatedly come to Mr. Mindong Yitang's house to cause trouble. Finally, facing the upheaval at home, after some time back, Zhuo Yilin returned to New York. He felt New York was better. His wife and children were buried there, and though it was a foreign land, he couldn't leave them. He had to stay there to visit them occasionally, and he also wanted to witness Chen Mindong receive his legal punishment. On January 27, 2014, test results showed that Mindong had signs of severe mental illness and could not continue participating in the trial or defend himself. Therefore, the judge decided to postpone the trial and send Mindong for treatment first. After several months of treatment, on June 28, 2014, Mindong finally appeared in court. This was the first time the victim's family faced the killer who had cruelly taken the lives of their loved ones. Zhuo Yilin's sister couldn't contain her pain and anger when she saw the cruel murderer who had killed her sister-in-law and nieces and nephews. She jumped up from her seat, pointed at Mindong, and shouted, "You destroyed my family, you!" Meanwhile, Yilin's mother fainted multiple times from the overwhelming pain. 2 years after the horrific crime, after multiple court appearances on October 7, 2015, Chen Mindong finally agreed to plead guilty. At 2:30 p.m. that day, Mindong, in prison clothes and handcuffs, entered the courtroom. Judge Judy stated, "After reviewing Chen Mindong's plea agreement, I will only accept this agreement if he never returns to society." Both Mindong's lawyer and the district attorney's office agreed. The tragedy of the Zhuo family isn't just a story about a bloody murder. It's a painful portrait of shattered American dreams. On one side was a hard-working man who diligently built his family's happiness, only to witness his wife and 4 young children brutally murdered. On the other was Chen Mindong, who, when his illusions of life in a foreign land crumbled, allowed temporary madness to destroy not only the lives of innocent children, but also the bonds between 2 once close families. And that's it for today's case. What do you think about this case? Please share in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you in the next videos.